Hi, and welcome back to Rise Up Podcast. Today, it's a Rise Up story again with my fabulous, wonderful, amazing friend, Will Thomas. Will Thomas and I go back to 2007. We both studied to become instructors of hypnotherapy with Performance Partnership. And I'll never forget walking into this classroom. I didn't know anybody. And there was this one person just looking at me. And I went and I said hello. And here we still are having beautiful, wonderful conversations. He's a breath of comfort, never mind fresh air. He's a breath of comfort and love and trust and acceptance. And he's just one of the most amazing people that I've come across. And I'm so grateful that he's my friend. So for all of you listeners, I would like to introduce you to Will Thomas, to this story.
Hi, Vicky. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. I assure you it's a mutual reflection of how I feel about you too, and it's great that we're still in each other's lives all this time ahead, and it's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Nearly 20 years. Next year it's 20 years. We're 19 and a half years in.
That's wild.
It is. So, Will, tell us a little bit about you and your life and your short story, because I know we're going to focus today on one very specific Rise Up story, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So in the present day, I live in a beautiful place called Malvern. Feel very lucky to live here. It's growing up, I always wanted to live with a mountain behind me that I could walk or run up every day. And it's not quite a mountain here in the Malvern Hills, but it's almost. And that it fills me with joy every day. I have a little dog called Dory. She's a Tibetan Terrier, so she's of the mountains and she loves going for sniffs and walks. So I work as a coach, an executive coach, as a life coach, as a therapist, a hypnotherapist, using EFT, which we'll maybe touch on later, because it's been quite a pivotal thing in my life. And also, I'm also an academic. I work at a university part-time, and I love writing. I've written books over the years, various topics, both fiction, form of poetry, and non-fiction. And a key part of my life has always been contribution. So I think even the writing has an element of what does it contribute. And I have a lovely partner, James, and we are adventurers. We love going out in the wild in our kayak and climbing hills.
I've seen some crazy photographs from the two of you. Having grown up, because I'm not South African, but having grown up in South Africa, we used to do a lot of camping. We have perfect location, scenes, and weather. And then I see the two of you going up in Scotland, God knows where, in Wales, camping in torrential rain. And you're sitting inside your tent, and I'm like, how is this fun? So I'm always amazed. I'm amazed at how the two of you embrace outdoor adventures and all of that kind of stuff. It's just beautiful to see.
Yeah. Well, there's the old adage, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong kind of activities.
And the wrong clothes.
The wrong clothes. So, that's what we will normally say. But,
I think that was Billy Connolly said, no bad weather, just wrong clothes.
Yeah.
So, Will, like I said, we need to bring you back over and over again because you've got so much to contribute. And I know that you are the person that loves to give. And just to let everybody know, I have written 2 books thanks to Will. Will had, but I think at the time that I wrote my first book, I think Will had written 14, and I think 6 or 7 were already bestsellers. So I went to Will and I said, please help me, because I was just doing so badly. And he's just a fabulous author coach. So if anybody's listening to this and thinking, how do I do this? I'd point you to Will. Now, this is a Rise Up story, and I know that you walk the talk. I know from knowing you that you use what you've learned and who you are to rise up and actually be the phoenix rising up. So we're going to talk about one of those stories because, like most people in life, there's quite a bit of stuff happening in everybody's life, and there's one particular one that I admire you for because I know how difficult it was for you at the time. So do you want to start with that?
Yeah. I guess a very short backdrop to that is I grew up in London in the 70s and 80s at a time when being different wasn't okay. So from probably the age of 9, I had this multiple layers of levels of understanding that I was different to pretty much every kid around me. And, one of those differences was just I really have this empathy that I find really difficult to manage. And I've learned over years how to manage it much better. But I just felt other people's pain a lot. And I also, growing up, realized that not everyone was like that. And because of that empathy, I think I ended up being pushed around a lot. I didn't stand up for myself, and I was making excuses a lot for other people's, what I would now class as not great behavior. But also, I was harboring a secret, which back then, thankfully now in the UK, it's being gay is kind of, in many regards, normal and okay, and more able to, you can live a life now with less pressure and less secrecy than you had to do back then. But you somehow carry that, when you've lived that, you carry that with you. So when I eventually escaped from this very homophobic kind of environment at home and got away from home, and eventually I met this lovely man, and eventually we built a life together. It was a life that was in secret a lot of the time because I was in a career path at the time where it just, it would have been career suicide to be open, to come out. And we eventually, the opportunity to have a civil partnership arrived because of the change in the law. And it was honestly the happiest day of my life when the kind of culmination of having come out to my family, having helped my, having built a life where we had some kind of authenticity. And there we were together celebrating our relationship and our life together. It was so much more than just the celebration of our relationship and our love. It was also the kind of almost the summation of everything that I had to struggle through, and many people in a similar situation.
Yeah.
So when a few years later I had this, I was cycling through Malvern one day, minding my own business, going to the gym, and a car came up behind me and knocked me off my bicycle. I flew into a parked car and had a head injury which wiped out my short-term memory for around about a year.
Yeah.
And initially, it sounds horrific, but initially it was blissful. We all try to achieve this mindful state and, of not having invasive thoughts. So, a mind that can't remember what just happened, let alone what happened, a few weeks or months or days ago, it is a really weirdly blissful state. But then as the memory starts to come back and the cognitive function starts to come back, I start to realize what could have happened and that I've got a long recovery. And in the midst of all this, things are not going well with me and my former husband. And unbeknownst to me, there was an affair. He was having an affair with someone else. I didn't find this out at the time, but it became, as I got stronger and recovered from this injury, it became clear that this had been going on a long time, and also that the very fabric of what I'll now call the sticking plaster that this relationship was coming apart. The elastoplasty piece was deconstructing, and I was unraveling. And I was unraveling at a more of a level than just my marriage is breaking up. So that began that kind of descent into a spaghetti of really difficult emotion.
And can I ask, you unraveling, and I'm asking because I've gone through something not the same, but I've gone through an unraveling sort of experience. And the thing that I was kind of questioning myself all the time is how can this be happening to me? I'm the one that's teaching people and supporting people, and I'm giving lessons, and I know so much about it, and I'm unraveling, and I'm all the things that I know and teach are now happening to me, and I feel out of control. Did you have that kind of feeling as well?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I would say that there's a kind of, we call it therapist shame that comes with.
You can't be human because you're doing this. There's no ways these things happen to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's a really interesting. A kind of a kind of other layer of I should be able to manage this. I should be able to sort this out. And what's interesting about that though is I think there is this kind of shock phase, which I can look back now and see. And I had this bizarre moment one day. It was I can remember it was around this time of year. It was around sort of when we're recording this in an April kind of time, and the weather was just getting better. And I sat at the kitchen table one day, and I had this sudden realization that the couples therapy that we'd been doing together wasn't working. That this was the only direction this was going in, was either carrying on rumbling along in this really uncomfortable relationship, or I had to make the move, because my ex-partner had a history of not taking charge and not taking responsibility, avoiding. So it was me that had to do this, and it was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. But there was this weird moment, which I've written about, and where I sat at the kitchen table and this wave of unimaginably, indescribable level of emotion came over me. And then I experienced what I've read about before when people say I was beside myself. And there was a part of me that I now realize was a really wise part of me that rose up out of me, and it kind of floated above, and I remember it being above and to the right, and it just said in this really, really calm voice, everything unfolds perfectly.
I love it.
And I had a WTF moment with this thing, and I was kind of conversing with it because it was literally, in bits on lent across the kitchen table. Everything unfolds perfectly. And I wanted to shout at it, and I think I probably did, and say, how can this be perfect? But you know what? As the years have gone by, I realized that deep, wise part of me was right. Because that deep, wise part of me has realised that was a sticking plaster. And the work I've done, the depth of work that I've done on myself in what you described earlier, this rise up moment, it's messy, it's uncomfortable, there's tears, there's snot, there's there's every possible emotion that you can imagine, and they're mixed and blended like some sort of, weird Farrow and Ball color chart that nobody would want on their walls. It's really messy, but and I think coming back to that point you're making about being a therapist, being a coach and a counselor, and I can't deal with this. Well, in that moment, who can? In that moment when one's world unravels, who can deal with it? But that is important to feel.
Yes,
Important to feel that, and it led me to, from that moment, and you talk about a rise up moment, there was a sequence of different types of events that happen around that time that just pivoted me into a place of, okay, accept what's here. Just be at peace, at some level, be at peace with what's here. And now get in touch, be in touch with who you are, who I truly am, that really deep sense of my values and my spiritual core, and act going forward out of that. So it's this really bizarre moment of almost collapse, but then this emergence of something that's so deeply authentic to self. And once I'd realised that, once I'd seen that, there was no going back. And actually, it's this, that kind of lowest point, and then that realisation.
And I think that you and I see this a lot, and it's a lot of the work that we do, is that feeling that it's a very, very tender and vulnerable feeling that you kind of think that you're not going to survive this. And what I see a lot in my clients is that they get too scared to actually go into it and touch it and feel it and emerge out of it. And therefore they suppress and they hold back, and they either mask with themselves or they just mask using substances like alcohol or whatever it is, and kind of recover. And I say this in inverted brackets because it's not really recovery, because it comes back. What hasn't been dealt with in that vulnerable moment comes back to bite you in the arse. And so as I'm listening to you, my question is what specifically, or I don't know if there's anything specific, or what did you do in order to go, right, this is happening, I'm taking it in, I'm gonna go. I mean, when we go through crisis and then we have to rise up, none of us have got the training. It's never happened before in our lives, and we don't have the training. How did you do it? How did you know that you needed to trust that part of you that was so vulnerable and it's so scary? And you've got therapist shame, which I've experienced massively, which is like, this can't be happening to me. It can happen to anybody else, but not me. And then it does.
Yeah. And I think that's a really multi-layered thing, the response to that. But I think first of all, it was really important to, and I don't know how I did this, I don't know how I knew this at the time, but just to trust that being in space and quiet and allowing myself to experience whatever this was would bring something positive, and it absolutely did. And I think also seeking support.
Yeah.
And I am, very blessed that I have some wonderful people in my life. Very few friends, but they're friends who I can absolutely rely on and count on. And you're one of those, Vicky. And, I think, one of the layers to that response and that recovery is that you were such an exquisite listener. And I think sometimes, sometimes I think on the other side of it, if we feel for the person we're supporting, if we are the supporter, if we are the person someone's leaning into, somehow we feel like we have to fix it. I think it's a natural human instinct sometimes to feel we've got to fix it, we've got to offer something, we've got to problem solve, we've got to rescue, and that's it. But actually, in that moment, that pure, exquisite listening, that space for someone just to say, this is how it is so important. And I think I was blessed to have that with you and with my sister and with a number of other people as well, and in and out of different types of therapy. And it's so interesting. I have learned so many different approaches to therapy change over time, and I think because who knows what's the right thing at the right time. There's a strange eclectic process, no, not eclectic, kind of, intuitive process around this is what I feel drawn to at this time.
And I think this is what confuses people, in the sense that they'll try some form of therapy and it doesn't work. And then they kind of go, therapy doesn't work for me, rather than this type of therapy didn't work. Because like you, I did lots of things in my life where, when I thought, oh, this is great. This is like the bee's knees. This is everything. And I went 600% in, became an expert, like really an expert in everything, only to then come across some of my clients that it just didn't work. And then you think, okay, so if this doesn't work, there must be something else. So then you find the next thing and the next thing. So again, I'm hoping that when somebody's listening to this and they are in that dark space, is that if they've tried something that's not helping them, to just go look for something totally different and find it. But you said something that I think is... I would love to say it's the starting point, but I think it's the second step. And you said that I started to accept my circumstances, but I think before the acceptance is we have to have an awareness of this is what I'm feeling, this is what's happening to me, this is how I'm reacting, this is how I feel like I'm not coping. Now I can accept that and be absolutely petrified, because if I accept that, I guess for me it was, if I accept this might never change. That was my biggest fear, that the acceptance would make what is going on, it's okay, and therefore it doesn't have to change. And that was my fear.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah. I can relate to that. And I can't honestly say how I got past that. Maybe it was listening to other people talking. So I think, things like this podcast that you put out are really important. It's our own journey. It's our own process when difficult things happen in our lives. But listening to other people and being able to pick out what might be a next step for us is really important. And that so aligns with what you've just said about, that kind of thought of therapy doesn't work. Well, I've found some therapy I've worked with, or some therapists haven't been quite right, but that willingness to keep going and try something else has been really, really potent. But you just really pulled out something that I haven't realized until now for me, which is that the importance of trusting that however scary and difficult and overwhelming the emotions will be, they won't go on forever.
Yeah.
And actually it's something that's a connection I've made with something you said to me all those years ago, which is, and this too shall pass. It hasn't come to stay. And it might pass in cycles, and it might revisit, but almost it's different. And I think from my earlier life, one of the things I learned when I would now been diagnosed with depression, I think in my 20s, when I was first dealing with the whole coming out process. And a lot of that was because I didn't feel. I didn't allow myself to feel. And so it went in deep and it stayed in, and it will always find a way to express itself. And it expressed itself in physical illness, and it expressed itself in this retreat from the world and this very anxious process of trying to keep suppressed stuff. So I think safe places, safe people, safe environments to enable yourself to have that space to feel are so important. And I feel this particularly, I work with a lot of people from the LGBTQ plus community in my practice, but I find particularly with men, there's so many hidden messages to men about emotions, and about not expressing emotions, and about these weird ideas of weakness. And I do wonder if, for me growing up, my dad was constantly saying, don't cry, don't be weak, stand up for yourself. and bless him, he had a lot of strengths, but he could also be quite an aggressive man in the way that he put ideas across. And I something inside me always has said, if you want to cry, cry. And so I did, and I have done. And I think, honestly, letting that emotion out has been an important part of recovery.
I always describe emotions to my clients, my class. Think about them as like 2-year-olds that are going, mommy, 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 mommy. And you go, mommy's busy. Mommy, mommy. They don't stop. They will throw a temper tantrum. They will do all sorts of things. They will cause disruption because what they want is attention. And I say that emotions are the same. If it's coming up, it's time. It's time to sit down on the floor, stop everything, pause, and go, okay, what are you about? Yeah. Why are you coming into my life right now? Why are you demanding so much attention? Because suppressed emotions, they will, like you said earlier, and we both have seen this, experienced it, comes out in all sorts of places.
And that's interesting. I think one of the things I learned to do at the time was to also have a dialogue with emotion and with the parts of me, because I had to work during some of this period because there was a financial disaster going on at the same time with this divorce.
Yeah, it was on all levels.
yeah. I mean, it affects so many things. But yeah, there was this necessity to be able to say, I see you, I hear you, I know that you have needs. This is to my emotions and to the parts of me that are expressing these emotions. And we will check in with this, and I will give it a date and a time. Because right now I'm here in this situation, to support others. And I was a trainer, I did a lot of training at the time. And so I'd have to go into groups of people and be and make sure that they had a great learning experience. And I am so proud of how I managed to do that during that kind of meltdown period after during and after the divorce. But yeah, that ability to say, we will check in with this, we will give this space. And on the occasions I learned that if I broke my promise to my parts and my emotions, boy, did they come back.
With a vengeance.
With a vengeance.
They are truly like toddlers, and you've got to stay with it. I did a lot of that kind of stuff when I was still living in South Africa, where I used to write out dialogue. So it would be like anger, and anger would say, hello, and I'm going, what are you back here for? He says, well, you invited me, and I would write these dialogues. And it's so interesting how many years later that I've still got the one book where I used to do these exercises and read these dialogues. Wow, cathartic, like you totally, things about yourself that you don't know. Because something that you and I talk about a lot is that the one thing that is the most valuable thing for us to know is how to understand ourselves, to know who we are, to understand our thinking. And it's the one thing we don't get taught in school on what are emotions? Why is this coming up? What can I do about it? How can I pause? How can I step back? How do I rise? What is acceptance? What does acceptance mean? If I forgive somebody, does that mean that it's okay that they did this bad thing? All this kind of stuff that my clients come to me, and when I explain things, they go, why don't they teach this to us at school? So I know that a lot of things have come out of your Rise Up, but there is something that happened at the Greengrocers that has started an amazing program that you run. Can you talk to me a little bit more?
My greengrocer trip.
Yes, because I love that story.
Yeah. There's an interesting moment. I'm trying to place it in time. I think there was a separation from my ex-husband, a physical. We moved apart, and then there was a period of time when it became really clear that he had a really clever lawyer and lots of financial capacity to engage that lawyer, and I didn't. And I gradually, the next sort of wave of catastrophe after accepting that relationship was over was that I was going to lose pretty much everything that I'd built up. And we had a really good life in terms of the material trappings of life. And sure enough, through some clever lawyerness, I did. So there was a moment I didn't, it was when I wasn't working very much, and I couldn't afford to eat. And so I would go to these kind of small greengrocer shops, and I'd find the sort of last remnants of things, the really dodgy looking vegetables that nobody would buy. And I went to this greengrocer's in a town not far away from here, and I was in this greengrocer's, and there's this box of sort of dodgy looking wonky vegetables, and there was this carrot, and it was, for those of a certain age who grew up in the UK, you might remember there was a programme called That's Life, run by Esther Rantzen, and they used to have a parade of unusual vegetables, most of which looked sort of vaguely suggestive and rude. And it was one of those kind of vegetables. It was a carrot. So I bought this carrot, and I went to the desk, and the guy at the desk and I had this giggle about this carrot. No words were exchanged, just this, like, that's a really weird carrot kind of look. And it was, what was weird is it was like a little person with a little tufty bit at the top where the leaves had been cut off. It had two legs, and then it had this winky. It had this really long, like, piece that was growing out, and there was a root hair on the end of this, so it also looked like it was peeing. And I can't remember at that point the last time I'd smiled. And I went home having smiled with the greengrocer, and I made, with that and a couple of sprouts, I made this delicious soup. But as I was preparing the soup, I just couldn't stop giggling about this weird wonky vegetable thing. And unbeknown to me, it was planting a seed, because it was a very pivotal sort of transition moment. And as I was eating that soup, I thought, things ain't that bad. If I can go to the greengrocers, have a giggle, and make a delicious soup from practically nothing, then there's hope. There's possibility. And it kick-started, I think now, a lot of creativity. It's kick-started me painting. Now, I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I love colour, and I love form, and I love shape, and I experimented with that. And it was a good few years afterwards that I got the idea for what I now call the perfectly wonky life. Because I look back at that carrot moment about the wonky vegetable, and I realised that there are so many people that are sold this wild idea that we live a linear life, that we're born, we have a great childhood, great education, we get a great job, we maybe get married, we have a family, and it's
great
all
kids, great house,
great house, and then you retire
with a great pension.
A great pension, yeah, and you live happily ever after, whatever that is. Sold the linear life. And I realised, at that time, that there's so many of us don't have that kind of life, and actually we live a wonky life compared to this ethereal dream that we're all sold. There's all sorts of interesting theories around that dream, and how kind of Western centric it is, and how driven by commercialism and so forth. But what I realised was that a perfectly wonky life is also a great thing. But we can take a wonky life and we can find the value in it. We can find the opportunities in it. And that's absolutely what, from that kind of point in time on, it wasn't a sudden thing, but that I started to realise that, we can build a perfectly wonky life. So I built a course, and it's got in it lots of tools. And I say right at the beginning of the course, it's, adopt it, adapt it, put it aside. It, just like we've talked about here, tools and experiences and approaches and ideas come into our lives at different points in that journey of renewal and recovery. And so, we need different things at different times. So yeah, that was how the greengrocering experience led to the birth of what I call a movement, the Perfectly Wonky Life movement, which is supporting people to embrace your wonkiness, and don't be shameful about, because there's a lot of shame around, say a relationship breaking up or things we feel we should have done differently. Yeah, accept where we are and embrace the opportunities.
I always say to people that the only reason that there's this dissatisfaction is because we are taught and we are told, like you said, this is how the perfect life is. And then we compare ourselves to everybody else. But the truth is, nobody on the whole planet, out of 8 billion people, nobody is living your life. Nobody has your desires, your dreams, your purpose. There isn't another person that has exactly who you are. So there is nothing to compare, no race. No, there's no race that we're running and that we have to who's going to get there first, because they've got a different path. And it's fascinating to me to see how people will evaluate themselves through what other people are doing, and they don't know these people. So I love your course, because your course does allow people to just go, me. It's me. Let me see me and love me and be more of me and be unapologetically me. Because we are taught that if we don't measure to the list, that I don't even know who made that list, but anyway, that list, the list of the perfect life. If we don't measure to that, then you're not good enough. And that, of course, is one of our deepest fears and phobias. And because we know it's rejection, and it's our biggest phobia. We know that if we get rejected, we don't get loved. Somewhere deep inside of us, in the wisdom that we've got, we know that without love, we can't survive. So and
that grows that sense of need for belonging, but also it's belonging with and to what and whom. And I think, when I said earlier, it's almost a throwaway line, I have very few friends, but I can really count on them. I would say, I mean this in the kindest possible way, all my friends are pretty wonky.
Well, John Lavelle from the Society of NLP always used to say, your true friends are the ones that you can call at 3:00 in the morning and say, meet me here, bring a spade, and they'll be there and they won't ask questions. So I'll call them spade friends. So if you've got a spade friend, they won't ask questions. I'll just go, where do you want me to meet you? I'll be there. I'll bring 2 spades. Then you know that they're a friend. Well, before we go, obviously, who you are and how people can reach you will be in the notes. You came up with something very cute, very apt. We've got a bit of time, and it's about don't be a sticker, or be a sticker.
Be a sticker, yeah.
Be a sticker. Okay.
Be a sticker.
Tell me what a sticker is.
I love playing with words and ideas and frames of things. And it just came to me this morning when I was just reflecting on what we might talk about today. And so a sticker, STICKA. So I'm being slightly poetic with the language there. This idea of sticking at things and stickability, I think, is kind of important in this journey of navigating through a wonky life. And I think, so the sticker is some of the things that I've personally found very helpful, and I think some of my clients have over time. And the S is for spiritual silence and space. And I don't mean that in a sort of religious kind of observance kind of sense, but giving yourself space to check in and notice what's going on, what's happening in your internal environment, what are you feeling, what are those felt somatic sensations in the body. And like you were doing earlier around emotions, you were asking questions. What is this? This toddler, if it's a toddler that's part that's shown up, what does it need? And befriending those parts of ourselves, rather than seeing them as enemies or as conflicting parts, see them as contributors to a story, to an awareness.
Love.
Trust is the T of STICKA, and I think I would say my trust in the exit from that relationship was obliterated. I found it and have found it very difficult to trust again. But what do you know? The thing that was most apparent there when I came out of that was I had not trusted myself, and the trust with self, it has grown inordinately in the last decade and a half, and that's roots. That your trust in yourself, your trust in listening to what's going on with you and being curious about that, not being fearful but being curious. I see the opposite of fear being curiosity.
Yeah.
In a way, in that if we can be curious about things, we're almost playful in inquiring about what that is. So I think that building that trust with yourself, and that links to the next one, intuition.
Yeah.
Trusting, listening, and learning to differentiate inside yourself between what is intuition, what is that kind of deep wisdom that's coming through, that deep sense of knowing, what's just chatter, self-talk that's just noise.
And ego talk, because
Yeah,
the
and ego
can
talk. Yeah.
Ego can be quite aggressive and like, what are you doing? And you're an idiot. And that's definitely not spirit talking.
Yeah. No. And for many people, it's fear-based and it's power-based, and it's about wanting control in our life, which is a natural human thing. But so that checking in and intuition, wisdom, spiritual kind of guidance, it has its own quality. And I think understanding what is the somatic sense, that felt sense, the sensations in the body, the awarenesses, the aura, if you like, of how does this whole thing feel when I know deeply I'm checking in with something that's wise rather than something that's grabbing or grasping.
Nice.
Creativity has absolutely saved me. And I don't think creativity is a particular thing. It's not painting a picture or making a spoon or crocheting a shawl. It's more of an essence. It's a way of being, and you can apply it to all sorts of things. And I've definitely applied it to some of the courses I've developed, some of the approaches and tools that I've grown, but also just creativity. My garden is the things in my garden that are wooden are painted in a brilliant pink and a sky blue, because those are colors that came to me in that re-emergence experience, and I just love them, and that color is part of that creativity. So yeah, don't be tied to a particular activity around creativity, but get in touch with that, because it gets you in touch with your authentic self. Creativity is you. It's and be not afraid of the word creativity. Be curious about it, and what's your expression of creating. And then knowledge and skills is the K of STICKA, which is just keep learning. And I think that also has saved me, is to continue to grow and learn and be curious about what's available, what's out there, what might work, try stuff. And sometimes it doesn't work, like you said, try something else.
Yeah.
And lastly is the agility, which is that flexibility, and that comes with acceptance. Feel the emotions, find a way to accept the reality, but that doesn't mean passively accepting it. Accept the reality that you are faced with, and then work out how you will act on that reality in a way that is authentically right for you, so you're in line with your values. So you don't act in a way that is going to make you feel uncomfortable because it crosses your values, but you're being true to yourself in the way that you respond to whatever challenges you face. And I think that I've arrived at a place in my life now where I feel I do that most of the time. And that is a combination of those elements of STICKA. And I still mess up, and I still get it wrong, and I still think, oh, why did I do or say that? But I'm compassionate with myself, and I'll check in, and what was that about, and what can I heal there, and what might be a helpful way to work with that. So I think, yeah,
And
maybe
you
there's
know,
also,
can I also just say that, yes, that some of the time it's a great opportunity to reflect and heal and grow. And sometimes we just do dumb shit and we just got to like, oh, okay, stop doing it. There's no, just, it is what it is. I went wrong. I didn't follow.
Yeah. And I think I maybe add another K, so it's STICKA to this, which would be kindness to others
Oh,
and kindness to
yeah,
self. Because I think, yeah, we mess up, we do things, we are a, a, a plethora of all these parts of us that have broken away at various points of trauma in our life, and we can work with that. Yeah, Virginia Satir, who is just such a positive inspiration as a therapist and a wise person, talked about parties and having this party
so
where you.
for people that are listening, what is a parts party?
Yeah. Okay. So there's there are various traditions of coaching and therapy which invite us to identify and label parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And these parts, the theory goes that these are parts that break away from the core of us at points where we need some kind of support for survival.
Yeah.
And so we might have a part that is that toddler, that's a very childlike part of us, but has to scream because there are unmet needs.
Yeah.
We might have a part of us that's very protective and will shut us down and keep us safe by making us more invisible. And there are parts of us that can deal with challenges, or parts that come in and will, lift the corner of the car.
And I guess, I do think that people know this unconsciously because we use it in language. We will say, for instance, in a conversation, there's a part of me that agrees with this. So we actually say it. Or there's a part of me that feels this way. There's a part of me that's conflicted.
Yeah.
So we know. Yeah. Okay. So there's a parts party.
Yeah, so Satir invited the idea of, instead of seeing these parts as conflicting entities within us that are always having spats and conversations and doing one thing when another one wants to do something else, we invite them to the party and we start to look at them as having both light and shadow, and they have gifts that they can offer us, and they have sometimes they stimulate behaviors that are maybe not helpful. But by building a relationship with those parts, we can utilize their gifts and we can minimize the negative impacts they sometimes have. But the beautiful thing about that as well is the more they come together and the more they work together, the more unified and the more whole they and we become. So there is it's almost a stepping stone, I think, the parts party, to a more unified self and a more unified sense of how we show up in the world, how we respond, and how, in my value system, how we contribute.
Yeah.
How we leave moment by moment a mark in the world that makes the world a happier place for everybody. And goodness knows the world needs that right now.
Well, that's an understatement, but it's like what you and I have often talked. You've got to start with self. You've got to start with yourself and stop thinking about what's happening outside of ourselves and our world. Stop trying to think that you can control, because you can't control anything. Get back to you and heal you.
Sure. Oh.
Well, wow, we've gone way over time, but it's been such a wonderful, wonderful podcast episode with you, and we're definitely going to get you back here. Like I said earlier on, how people can get in touch with you and engage with your products will be all in the show notes. All I can say from the bottom of my heart, other than this was just such a pleasure, is such a deep, heartfelt thank you for sharing, contributing in the most beautiful way that you always do, and for being part of my world and part of now everybody else who's listening's world.
Thank you, Vicky. And just reflecting all of that to you as well. I'm just so grateful that you're putting this out into the world for people. It's it's rich and it's important. Thank you.
Thank you. So for my listeners, if you think that there was something that someone that you know needs to hear Will's wisdom, please share this podcast with them. Whether you do it quietly or loudly, that will be fine with me. And if you want to know more ways of how to work with me or how to be part of my community, I've got a beautiful membership. I do retreats, I do all sorts of things. Those details are also in the show notes for you to access. And for the rest, I'll wish you well. I wish you a good week, and here's to your success.